Hello, my name is Jeff Horn, and I'm the Chief Security Officer at Order. At Order, we make the most comprehensive platform to discover and safeguard IoT and unmanaged devices. Utilizing our platform, we enable the entire device security workflow, from discovery and classification to risk identification and network segmentation. Thank you for joining me today for this short presentation where we will be discussing IoT and unmanaged device security and how these devices are quickly becoming the #1 security threat on networks. Let's begin. Since most of you are inside the security community, you're probably all familiar with these things. The Mirai botnet and Dark Nexus. They targeted IoT devices with common exploits and things like weak default passwords like admin. You've also seen that researchers are looking at implantable devices from a health community perspective that are vulnerable to exploits that can be transmitted wirelessly over either Bluetooth or Wi-Fi. You've probably seen the news where hackers are breaking into security cameras or breaking into cameras at home using weak exploits or default username and passwords. One of the things that we see inside of enterprises is the predominance of televisions and smart TVs. These TVs usually run an embedded OS, usually based on Linux, and they're now coming with cameras and recording features like mics. And the FBI recently put out a warning that hackers could use exploits and vulnerabilities on these televisions in order to remotely connect, turn on the camera, turn on the microphone, and start recording conversations. And then last year, we actually saw a 300% rise in cyber attacks against IoT devices. So what makes these IoT devices, so targeted by these hackers? A lot of these device manufacturers are putting weak and guessable passwords inside of these devices. They have insecure network services. They're not deployed correctly. They're deployed right on the internet. Usually they have insecure services, insecure privacy protections, and a complete lack of device management. If left unchecked, these IoT devices just become extremely pervasive inside of the network. We estimate by 2023, the average CIO will be responsible for more than 3 times the endpoints that they managed in 2019. And this is largely due to the increase in IoT devices. These IoT devices are utilized by hackers in order to spread ransomware. And the global damages from ransomware reached about $11.5 billion in 2019. From a healthcare institution perspective, with these IoT devices now responsible for spreading malware, we're seeing that over 75% of the healthcare institutions are infected by malware on a yearly basis. By 2021, we estimate that 70% of OT security will be managed directly by the CIO or CISO or CSO departments, and that's up from 35% today. And then also we estimate that ransomware will attack a business every 14 seconds by the end of 2020. Many IoT devices are trivial to compromise and continue to be pervasive on the network. And you simply cannot protect what you cannot see. So, number one, visibility is key here for these IoT devices. One of the things that we found in the healthcare industry is that passive collection and identification of devices is preferred. Obviously, from both a security and IT perspective, maintaining a complete asset inventory is absolutely vital to network security. As these devices enter the network, you need to be able to immediately identify them and classify them. And you can't be dependent on a system being online or on the network at the time of scan. Traditional scanners just don't work, both from a time of scan and having to have the devices operating at the time. Or also, we're seeing that a lot of these sensitive IoT devices and loMT devices simply can't handle a regular port scan from some of these scanners. They'll simply fall over or they'll crash. So we've discovered that passive collection and identification of devices is absolutely preferred across the industries. One other thing is absolutely vital to protecting IoT devices is continual monitoring. Being able to passively identify devices, classify them, and identify vulnerabilities is also key. being able to look at their external communications from the devices and build a behavioral model of how these devices typically communicate allows you to detect things like behavioral anomalies. You obviously don't want your video camera suddenly communicating with China, for instance. And also, once you've classified and discovered these devices, creating a security-focused segmentation policy is absolutely key for these IoT devices, particularly if they cannot be patched for simple vulnerabilities. And as I said, behavior monitoring is absolutely key. If you're not continually monitoring your IoT devices, you are absolutely left vulnerable. So once you have total visibility, you can start answering really important questions. Things like, are you seeing your cameras communicate with anything strange or outside sites that are potentially malicious? Are you seeing any sort of unusual activities internally? A lot of these pieces of malware will scan for IoT devices in order to discover, both if they exist on the network, but also are they vulnerable to certain techniques? And being able to see that reconnaissance is absolutely key. Being able to answer things like, how many LG WebOS TVs do I have on my network? And how many are potentially vulnerable to turning on the camera and microphone system and recording remotely? Also, being able to have this type of visibility also extends to managed devices, like how many servers do you have? What are those operating systems that those servers are running? And then also, are any devices managed, unmanaged IoT devices? Are they connecting with any malicious websites? Some of the things that we've seen at Order are simple, like phishing attacks. Someone gets an email, they click on the link, and they accidentally visit a malicious website or a phishing website. And, that's a managed device that we've seen. But we've also seen complicated attacks. Things like rogue access points put in place in order to steal Wi-Fi credentials in enterprise environments. We've even seen a badge reader taken off of a door and replaced with a malicious badge reader that was connecting to the network that would allow unauthorized access. Similarly, we've seen, simple spoofing techniques. Once hackers break into environments, they're simply spoofing their MAC address to look like, a legitimate device in order to bypass access control lists. We've seen autonomous pieces of malware spread ransomware and also contribute to distributed denial of service attacks on IoT devices with weak username and passwords. One thing that we tell all of our customers at Order is that network segregation can be a powerful tool used to mitigate the risk against inherently vulnerable IoT and unmanaged devices. Oftentimes, IoT devices can live inside of a network for years, and sometimes they can be very expensive. Inside of hospital networks, we sometimes see CT scanners, and these devices can run upwards of $500,000. Unfortunately, we also see these CT scanners run Windows XP and have all of the vulnerabilities associated with an unsupported operating system. On top of that, we also see these CT scanners run vulnerable services like SMB v1 and v2 that cannot be turned off. The reason SMB v1 and v2 cannot be turned off is that these CT scanners utilize the SMB protocol in order to share images across the hospital's network. Now, running a vulnerable operating system with exposed vulnerable services makes these CT scanners a likely target for hackers if they were to ever enter the hospital's network. It also makes these CT scanners a good candidate for network segregation, being able to isolate these CT scanners so they can only communicate with authorized machines on a healthcare's network. Next, I'm going to walk you through what type of network segregation we typically see inside of hospitals. I'm also going to discuss an incident that happened earlier this year with one of Order's customers. One of our customers was infected with a piece of ransomware called WannaCry that propagates throughout the network utilizing an exploit called Eternal Blue that utilizes the vulnerable SMB v1 and v2 protocol in order to propagate. Luckily, this customer was able to utilize an emergency network segregation policy and was able to isolate infected machines once they were discovered on the network inside of a segregated quarantine VLAN. They then subsequently were able to mitigate the propagation of the piece of ransomware, but also patch and remove it from those infected systems without infecting the rest of the network. Let's continue. As I mentioned, network segregation is absolutely critical from a security perspective. A lot of the networks that we see are simply segmented by physical and organizational boundaries. Things like a layer 2 VLAN per floor or a layer 3 subnet per business unit. And in order to protect these IoT devices, we believe that a device-centric, security-focused segmentation is absolutely key. When we enter hospitals, we see that 90% of the VLANs actually have medical devices present on them. We've seen things where a cardiac device is on the same network as the vending machine in the guest area. So security segmentation for these IoT devices should be intentional and based on device context. But in order to do this, you need to be able to have fast and accurate device classification, and you need to be able to monitor patterns in order to discover, who needs access and, what are these things needing to reach out to and who needs to reach out to them. And also, if you discover that any of these devices are vulnerable, a great mitigation technique is to actually put them on their own isolated VLAN or isolated subnet. I want to walk you through something that one of our customers recently experienced with a piece of ransomware. They had a piece of ransomware called WannaCry that was spreading throughout their network. WannaCry actually spreads through an exploit called Eternal Blue that uses a vulnerability inside of weak SMB versions in order to propagate throughout the network. And one of the things I can tell you from my incident response background is that the detection of a compromise and the inability to actually react appropriately to it is one of the most frustrating scenarios that any security organization can experience. So in this scenario, I want to walk you through what our customers did with the Order tool in order to both detect the vulnerability, detect the exploit on the wire, and then also segregate those infected machines on the network in order to eliminate the infection from propagating further. Here's the Order dashboard. Inside the Order dashboard, you can click on the incident summary and device summary in order to bring up the security dashboard. Once inside the security dashboard, you can visually see all of the open external communication channels and then both vulnerabilities and infections present on the network. In this case, we're going to simply go down here to Trojans, and that will bring up a list of Trojan activity on the network. And we can see here that we have a few devices that are sending out Eternal Blue, which, as I mentioned, is used by the WannaCry and several pieces of ransomware in order to propagate on the network. So simply clicking on the list of devices that are associated with this Eternal Blue traffic will bring up the list of devices within the network that are actually sending out this malicious communication. Inside here, we can actually go up here to the top and we can apply an action to all of these devices within the network. Now, all of these devices might be connected to different switches, they might be on different firewalls, but given Order's integrations, we can actually create a segmentation policy across pretty much any network device present on a network. Once we want to apply actions, we can just simply click the Actions button and select all of the devices. And as you can see here, from these devices, we can actually have the ability to add them to a blacklist. We can blacklist them and shut their ports off if they're connected to any switches or firewalls that allow us to do so. We can actually generate a blacklist CLI, so we can then take that output and put it inside of a change request and put it into something like Novolo or ServiceNow integrations. And then we can also just change the VLAN. And in this customer situation, they had an isolated VLAN that was their quarantine VLAN, which had their EDR tool as well as their patching tools like BigFix or SCCM. And then once in this VLAN, they were able to remediate those devices safely while not allowing them to propagate throughout their network. Again, my name is Jeff Horn, and I'm the Chief Security Officer at Order. Thank you so much for attending this presentation, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.